It is a mentality that shuns excuses and focuses on what's at stake. A mindset that resolves within itself that you must totally empty yourself to experience victory. A memory that remembers that who and what you are playing for is bigger than you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fourth Quarter Christianity Podcast, a podcast where we utilize sports as a metaphor for life to convey spiritual truths and ultimately to help us with practical Christianity. I'm your host, Daniel Webster, and I'm so very thankful that you have taken the time to tune in to today's episode. Today, we have a very special guest, a man whom I believe I can call my friend and fellow brother in Christ, Ron Wheeler. Ron serves as an elder in the Lord's Church. He's an Air Force veteran. He's a husband, father, and recently a new grandfather. We're so thankful for him and sharing his practical wisdom, his story with us on today's episode. We talk about a variety of topics ranging from how to deal with adversity all the way to how to remain disciplined even when things are going well in our lives. And so these things are very important as we continue to navigate throughout society, and I hope that you will benefit greatly from this episode. Again, I am so thankful for your support. I do ask that after this episode, you will subscribe to the podcast and also leave a rating and review, as this will help with the exposure of the podcast. So very thankful for you all. Now we will turn over to Ron and get into this episode. Ron, good to have you on the show today. How are you?
I'm good, Daniel. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. I've been waiting for our conversation. I'm pretty interested in wrestling and also your background in wrestling and also your career in the Air Force. A lot of things that I want to talk to you about and pick your brain a little bit. So I'll give you an opportunity just to introduce yourself really quick to the audience so they can get a chance to know you better.
Okay. I'm Ron Wheeler. I only spent a year in wrestling in high school, but the rest of my life I spent in the Air Force. So a lot of time in the U.S. Air Force, and now I'm working for the Air Force as a civilian. So now I'm just citizen Wheeler. So, but you and I know each other from church as brothers in Christ. You know, we're both married. We both have. You have one kid. I have kids, and of course now I'm a grandfather as well. So,
absolutely. How old is is your grandson?
3 months.
3 months. Yeah, that's
3 months in January. So I guess a couple more weeks will be 4 months.
Okay. Yeah, I remember right after we had Jabari, I think your daughter had him in October or something like that. Was it October or September?
October 23rd, which was 25 days early. So he was a preemie.
Okay.
But they saw that coming and were able to administer some, I think it was a steroid shot. Mm-hmm. So that helps the baby develop the lungs, because those are the last to develop, apparently. I'm not a doctor, but steroid shot helped the lungs. He came out fine and everything's great. Didn't have any problems, went home right away. So he's a growing boy.
Well, amen to that. I know that Key had Jabari 2 weeks and 2 days early. So he too was born a preemie. And I don't think that we had, or that they had to give him a steroid shot, but yeah, he's home, he's healthy, he's growing. So he's just turned 6 months 7 days ago. So we're excited.
Yeah, he's a handsome young man.
Thank you.
I see him every Sunday in his carrier. He's a cutie.
Well, thank you. You know, he gets that part from me, but don't tell Keith. One of the best definitions I've ever heard for wrestling is an unarmed contest in which two individuals compete in an impressive display of dominance and strength. Many wrestlers, unfortunately, are defeated before they ever engage in the physical competition. They look at their opponent, they size them up and say, oh, this person is much larger. obviously more physically imposing than I am. And so it's no way I can possibly take this person down or even win the match. And so before they ever engage, it's like, oh no, I'm going to lose. This reminds me of David and the story of Goliath. And the entire camp of Israel was afraid. David wasn't afraid, and he went and just knocked down that giant. But that's a little bit harder to implement in the lives of young people today. And so I guess, Ron, I mean, how can young people avoid accepting defeat before ever engaging in life itself?
Well, I would say you just need to be passionate about what you're going to do. I mean, you related the wrestling to life, but in the wrestling world, at least in high school, I think probably in the Olympics as well, you wrestle in a weight class. So typically, you're not going to do a David and Goliath situation in that
Thankfully.
respect. But those wrestling lessons, those guys you quoted, they probably competed at high levels, so they were very passionate about it, right? So we're not trying to convince people to be wrestlers, but we're trying them to relate it to life. And so I think being passionate, what do you wake up to, every morning? What do you think about? What are you thinking about every morning that just brings you to life? Whether that, in this case, these professionals, it was wrestling. They dedicated their life to it to compete at a high level. And so that was probably inspired by the passion they had. They loved it. Like I said in the beginning, I only did it for a year. So I did learn a lot from wrestling, but I didn't stay with it because I wasn't that passionate about it. It taught me a lot of lessons along the way. And I had to prioritize because of some conflicting situations in school as far as how many sports do I want to compete in and how well do I want to keep my grades up.
Right.
There's a
Yeah.
balancing act there, right? So wrestling took a lot of work, especially because I'm a short guy and I was a lightweight as well. And my coach asked me to go down a weight, so I have to now wrestle down a weight class, and so I had to lose weight, and I was already a small guy. And so that required, a lot more conditioning, more dieting, which got in the way of other sports and got in the way of my studies as well. So I did learn a lot from it, but you basically, in anything you do, whether it's wrestling or life, what you choose to do in life, you gotta be passionate about it. Love what you do. You know, um, pour your soul into it, and you're going to be good at it. You're not going to accept defeat because you're going to be passionate about it. And so that could be anything, whether it's football, accounting. You have to love it to stay with it. And of course, as you see in wrestling, there's the training that goes with it. There's practice, weightlifting, um, the wrestling matches with your co teammates. All that is repetition. And the only way you're going to stay with it is because you have that passion. You build that repetition, that persistence, and over time it builds patience. And all these are little lessons that will help you in life, of course. Uh, Obviously, repetition in anything is going to make you better. But
Right.
for you to stick with it and have it in your heart and your brain, you basically have to have the passion.
Right. I agree. I think in Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he talks a lot about being passionate. And I think he alludes to passion being something like if you have it, then what you do for a living is something that you wouldn't necessarily call your job. It's almost like your job, which we would deem your job because that's how you make you get your income. It's almost like you're doing it for fun. So, watching the Super Bowl on Sunday, and you realize that, these guys, a lot of them alluded to playing football at an early age. And now you're getting to play this sport that you love on the biggest stage and you get paid for it. I mean, what better life could you ask for? What better job, so to speak, could you ask for? I mean, you have
Right.
that when you have that passion involved with it, I think that it makes the job itself, the work itself, worthwhile and easier to engage yourself in, I guess. Let me ask you just really quick, how many years did you spend in the Air Force?
30.
30. I'm just going to take a wild guess and say that you needed a lot of passion to spend 30 years in the Air Force.
Yeah, and your passion changes over time. Different things motivate you, obviously, with age and maturity. And you mentioned the Super Bowl. My favorite part of the Super Bowl was the opening flyover, which happened to be three bombers, two of which I worked on, I worked on one of them and I flew in the other. And so there was that passion where you talked about these football players can't believe they're playing as adults on what they love. And they probably have mentioned, I can't believe they're paying me to do this. And because I love doing it. And so I had the same feeling in bombers. Obviously, you like to get paid to pay the bills, but
Right.
there are times I was flying, in a B-52 and doing missions for our country. And we would look at each other and say, I'd do this for free. I can't believe they're paying me to do this. Or this is amazing view we have up here to view the earth from 50,000 feet or from 200 feet. It's a very awesome perspective and it drives your passion. Or to fly at night up north and see the aurora borealis, the northern lights. You get to see some great things that just feed that passion. I know those are physical things, but it makes your job more satisfying.
I agree. It's interesting that when you do find yourself being passionate about something, when you put in the hours that it takes to, like for me in this podcast to just prepare for it, it's like you're not even working. You don't give it a second thought. You're just excited. Another thing when considering wrestling, sometimes you find yourself in the bottom position. Okay. Sometimes I know I grew up watching WWE, which I know is fake. Okay. It blew my mind when I found out that it was fake. Um, actually hurt
Well,
quite
it's,
bad.
I mean, those guys are, they train and they're performers though, right? And
Right.
it's not easy, but yeah, there's some scripting going on there.
Right. And I mean, my favorite wrestler was John Cena and The Rock. Love those two. But I mean, sometimes you find yourself in the bottom position, and what I've come to realize is that most wrestlers, like when they find themselves in the bottom position, I guess, or the fans that see their wrestler that they're rooting for in the bottom position, they automatically think that okay, they're in the inferior position, and the person on top is in the superior position. And so in life, it seems oftentimes with especially with teens and young adults, they face less than ideal circumstances, whether it be a dysfunctional family or a pretty bad situation at home. They struggle with low self-esteem, or they're figuratively crushed by their burdens, heartaches, fears, you name it. And simply put, life has just knocked many of us down. And like wrestlers, we sometimes fail and get injured. And so, how can young people acquire the mental fortitude to persevere in the midst of less than ideal conditions? And is it possible to succeed when life knocks you down?
Well, yeah, of course. We've got many examples in life of people succeeding in harsh conditions. I like to think of it as, if you're talking the mental piece, as a mental callus. You just that again, we talked about in the wrestling analogy of training and repetition, or anything you do, you have to build up a callus. You're a weightlifter, your hands over time build that callus. So it's the same thing mentally. If you think you're down, or in this case, you're at the bottom about to be pinned in a wrestling match, if your mental attitude is the opposite, like I'm about to reverse on this guy and get the points or be the person pinning him, it's about starting in your mind and working, drawing back onto your training. Hopefully you've conditioned yourself and you haven't been lazy to for your body to react to what your mind's thinking. So that
Right.
basically, translating into life is becoming resilient, right?
Right.
We talk about it in society or even in the military about resiliency and preventing suicide and why do people do that? And so it starts in the mind. And if you've been able to build that callus, and in order to build the callus, you got to have the pain, right? Not everything is going to be easy. So I would assume that some people that struggle with this might have had a bit, maybe an easier life up to that point and weren't ready for it as well as someone who might have faced adversity more often. And so, if you're having a pretty easy life, you might have to find some opportunities to develop and grow. But ultimately, if you go back to what you're passionate about and then you train for it, in those situations, they pay off because you've got that callus.
Right.
But then the unexpected happens, and you want to relate that to life. And I know there's things that happen to everyone because over the course of time, we're all going to face some kind of adversity. And the ultimate measure of a person is where they stand in those moments of discomfort and that challenge. Not You're not measured by where you stand in comfort or convenience, but it's really where you stand and how you handle those adversarial situations or those unfortunate situations that are surprises. But
Right.
different paths in life bring you to that. And obviously, we were talking about wrestling a little bit here. Um, those those highly disciplined endeavors train you and build that callus both mentally and physically.
Right. Love the quote by MLK. That's one of my favorites. I used to have it above my bed frame at Memphis because you were put in some pretty difficult situations, especially when you went out evangelizing into,
Oh yeah, yeah.
rather poor neighborhoods and sometimes even in the richer neighborhoods.
Oh
But
yeah.
I'm just going to take a wild guess and not really trying to put you on the spot here, but the answer that you gave seemed so unique to you. It's almost as if you literally apply most of the things that you said. I mean, is there any adverse situation that you remember maybe from your childhood or from your career in the Air Force that, I mean, you can share how you applied this mental fortitude, this resilience to overcome it?
I mean, I guess as a child, I'm like I said, I'm short, so obviously that became a benefit to my team as a wrestler in high school because I could fill a weight class that they were forfeiting previously. So suddenly, here's a short guy that can get some points for the team. I know it's an individual event on the mat, but eventually you're building points for an entire team, a high school team, and so that became a plus for me there. But go back in time a little bit to elementary school when you're the short guy and there's a bully in a crowd, um, they're gonna target you, right? They see weakness.
Right.
And so obviously the first time you get pummeled by a bully or whatever, picked on, pranked, you name it, that first event's a little shocking if you're not prepared, and you got to start building that resiliency. I think I went to my dad or something and said, "Hey, you need to teach me karate or kung fu or something." And he knew better, and he instead gave me put me into a judo class, which
Okay.
helped me in wrestling. It's very
Right.
similar, and I thought it was the most boring thing ever because it's defense only.
Yep.
Because he knew if they taught me some offensive skills, I might become the bully or go try to get revenge. Elementary school brain, right?
Well, that was smart.
Uh, yeah. So over time, that repetition, the constant learning how to fall, how to flip, how to do grappling, obviously paid dividends in wrestling, but it also paid dividends when a bully jumped on my back, and that muscle memory of immediately shifting weight and flipping. I'm a fourth grader and a sixth grader jumps on my back and I flip him on the ground. I didn't get messed with in elementary school for the rest of my time there, even though I was the short, scrawny guy.
Mhm.
And
No.
so I wouldn't call that totally, adversarial or a tough time for me, but, I was bullied and it didn't destroy me and it wasn't that bad, but it's relatable. And um, as you go through life, I'm sure I've had other, situations that might have been more academic. Something unfair happened at work, it's just administrative unfairness. And you just learn to take the punches with the good stuff as well.
Right. Your illustration or your analysis of judo when you said learning how to fall, it reminds me of a quote that Denzel Washington stated to a group of young kids. He said, in everyone wants to be an actor to make the millions of dollars and to have their face on the big screen. He said, but no one wants to, recognize the hard lessons that come along with acting, to deal with the hard stuff. He said, in this industry, you're going to fall and you need to learn how to fall. And it was my first time,
Right.
hearing that phrase. And I thought it to be interesting. And he said, you can either fall backwards or you can fall forward. He said,
That's
you
good.
learn from Olympic athletes that run track. They are taught to fall forward in life. And he said, we can take that and apply it to our lives because it's inevitable. We're going to fall, but how are you going to fall? And the only way to make sure that you still succeed is fall in a way that you can succeed. And that's obviously not falling backwards, but falling forward. So I thought that to be pretty cool and interesting.
Yeah, I
Um,
like that.
another going back to this idea of how like young people can succeed even when they're in an unfavorable position. It sort of reminds me of Jacob wrestling the angel in Genesis 32. And it talks about like how Jacob just refused to let go even though his hip was knocked out of place, and he still continued to wrestle with this angel. And the interesting thing about that is when I looked up the word wrestle, it literally means to struggle. And I thought about Jacob and wrestling. uh, it seems that Jacob was a professional wrestler from the day he was born. I mean, he wrestled with his brother in the womb, and then after that, he's he's wrestling with this angel, and eventually his name was changed because of that, to replicate his resilience and will not to give up. And so I think that's a big lesson, a big a piece of wisdom that young people can implement into their lives. Another thing that I want to just get into really quick is when you think about remaining, stagnant, you sort of quit moving. I know in wrestling, one of my buddies used to say that the coach used to tell him all the time to circle your opponent. Don't stop moving. Continue to maneuver. Continue to be elusive. Like don't just stand in one spot. And I remember asking him, why? Like, what if you have a strategic, point that you need to strike? And he said, well, you just pick that moment, but you don't stop moving because you give your opponent the opportunity to push you around, to even pin you or get you into some difficult position or submission that you can't get out of. Those same facts apply to life. So, how do or why is it so important for young people to not remain stagnant in life?
Yeah, like you said, don't stop moving. And you're a weightlifter, and obviously you lift weights to get stronger for wrestling as well. But it's the biology of it is atrophy, right? If you're stagnant, you get weak, and if you're weak, you're
Right.
probably going to have more problems in life or problems on the match in a match on the mat. It's easier to hit a stationary target than a moving target, and obviously you want to train, be well rounded. So even in wrestling, you don't want to make that mistake that some guys make in the gym as far as working out, and they skip leg day. You
Yep.
know, legs are actually important strength on the mat as well. But it all relates to building that muscle and that strength, and you don't want to be the opposite of that, which is atrophy. So physical fitness is important in life because it affects your health. And so if you
Right.
want to have a long, healthy life, you probably want to stay physically active. You don't have to be a professional wrestler or football player or whatever. Obviously, those guys get paid to stay physically fit because it benefits them in their job. But being physically fit benefits everyone based on biology, and it should only help you in your life. If you're healthier, you're probably going to be happier in
Right.
your job, whatever your job is. Especially if maybe you have a desk job like I have today. I'm not as active as I was in my younger jobs, but I do realize the importance of staying physically fit uh, to be the opposite of stagnant, and how
Right.
that pays off health wise, and whether it be weight training or aerobics, the heart training, the conditioning piece, it's going to benefit you in your life.
Right. I remember teaching the class on um, being spiritual, or how to disturb spiritual stagnation, and we we found an illustration that was given by a guy regarding like a pool of water. Like, if you don't stir up the water in your swimming pool for some time, you're going to get, a disease or some algae growing on it.
Right.
It's going to
Right.
look real nasty, and
Yeah.
you would get an odor and things like that. And we found out that I think malaria was one of the diseases that's born from stagnant water. Like, it's mosquitoes. That's like prime
Right.
breeding ground for mosquitoes, and then they contract that disease and carry it off. And once they bite you, then of course you got malaria now. So
Right.
that's one way to sort of illustrate, like, okay, it is important to disturb stagnant water, therefore it's important to disturb stagnation in your own life, to make sure that you're constantly moving. So even when
Right.
something negative happens, which I've been guilty of myself, when something doesn't happen or go your way, you kind of just like, oh, I don't want anything else to do with that. I'm fine where I am. I'm not going to try anymore. And you sort of get in this rut that you can't get out of if you refuse to keep trying. And I think I think what you said is very important to implement in our lives now, especially if we want to be successful. So one going back to this idea of another example of wrestling, I know that takedowns in wrestling requires, I guess, nearly perfect timing. So you have to make sure that you strike at the right time, make sure that you cover the proper distance. I guess it requires some skill as well, especially if the guy is a bit stronger and more physically imposing than yourself. And so even if you're on the bottom, I guess to reverse a certain position takes some skill and nearly perfect timing as well. So but there has been wrestlers, obviously, that have taken stronger wrestlers down. There have been wrestlers that has reversed a seemingly impossible position to reverse, and they won the match. I mean, they put themselves in a successful position to ultimately win the match. And so, I mean, how can young people today put themselves in the best position for success?
Well, like you said, it seems impossible, right? That how can a smaller guy take down a bigger guy, or who's basically maybe physically more conditioned looking? Maybe he's got the ripped abs or something, and the other
Mhm.
guy looks a little chubby, right? But it really comes down to a lot of things. In wrestling, it would come down to a lot of things, right? Like I said, you got to be well rounded. What if the guy that is chiseled is hasn't been working on his legs? You might
Right,
have the advantage with your legs to do something that changes the outcome of the match.
right,
So, but again, it comes back to that, attitude. I know we talked about passion, but attitude is a weapon system. At least we kind of think that way in the military. You have to have that good attitude, to think you're going to win, to not be the victim, to be always thinking on the positive of, I have this, I've been trained to do this, I've prepared for this. Obviously, those other things you've talked about being stagnant, if you've been doing the stagnant thing, then maybe your attitude's not going to be very confident either. But your success is won through your hard work, and that self-sacrifice in the back at your gym, in the wrestling analogy, where you're not only working on the skills. You talked about having, maybe you have the better skills through that repetition and that practice with your fellow teammates, training you in that muscle group, and then of course training with weights to be prepared for the explosive movements. But that all comes with, that success comes through your hard work ahead of time, that preparation. You had to have the right attitude to stay with it, and make those sacrifices. You know what your gifts are. You might be, certain moves might be your gifts in wrestling, and so you need to build on those. And the same things go in life or in your job. You know what your gifts are. You want to
right,
focus on those, which is probably what you're going to be passionate about.
right,
I know, biblically speaking, we want to within a church, we all have different gifts. So you want to build on those that you have, those gifts that are in your, what you're passionate about, what you have a good attitude about, and use that in a way of, roundabout way of saying, as a weapon system to
Right.
your advantage.
You know, that's my first time ever hearing of that, of an attitude expressed that way or defined that way, as a weapon system. Could you just, I guess, elaborate a little bit more on that, and what that sort of means in the military sense?
Well, yeah, it's it starts in your brain. Your brain drives your body. Your body's not going to do anything that your brain hasn't told it to do. And so
Mhm.
if you've, obviously there's some things that give you confidence along the way because you've trained and you've prepared and you're ready to take on the enemy. And that becomes a muscle memory. Um, if you train, there's a phrase that the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in combat.
Hmm.
So that brings a an attitude with you. You build confidence that you can do this. And so when you're faced with the challenge, whether it be on a wrestling match or taking a bomber to downtown Baghdad with, AAA and Sam's firing at you, you're not going to see the threat as scary. I mean, I'm not going to say you're not scared in combat, but um, that repetition, that resiliency, that mental callus, that strengthening conditioning, everything builds to a crescendo driven by your attitude. And so if you think of it as a weapon as well, because your brain is a weapon, you have to decide to be whatever you're going to be and do, whether it be something as simple as wrestling or something as simple as violent in combat. You have to decide to do it and do it decisively. And obviously, you talked about takedowns and just a minute ago, and that's very decisive and a little bit of surprise, and right. And so in the
Right.
military, we like to have the upper hand and surprise the enemy,
Right.
but it's all driven by your brain. And the more you think about how you're gonna win the victory, in, either on the wrestling match or for your country, it starts in your brain with passion and building, like I said, the muscle, the the mental callus, the resiliency. It all comes together for victory, whether it be
Absolutely.
victory at your job or victory on the mat.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That was my first time ever hearing that. I have to, I keep a book of quotes, and I'm definitely going to use that quote.
Well,
Have
I
an
didn't
attitude as a
originate the
weapon
quote.
system. No, that's
Yeah,
fine. That's
attitude is a
fine.
weapon. Yeah, yeah. It's I didn't originate it, but it was probably passed on to me by someone much smarter than me or more mature than me at the time.
Well, thank you for that. Like I said, that's something to definitely to live by, to implement, and to remember that our brain is the driving force for our behavior. Ultimately, we are not going to behave or do anything that our brain doesn't instruct us to do, and so I think that's pretty important to remember. Um, Sun Tzu, he is the author of The Art of War, and which is obviously interesting because you do, you have that book?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah, it's one of my
One of,
favorites.
one of the required reading lists from the Air Force.
Okay, okay. Well, see, I mean, that makes me feel even more comfortable, man. I thought, I said, okay, I hope that this guy is a pretty good person to quote in this episode. I'm not sure about his history or anything like that. I don't know that much about him, but I know the book is great. And one thing that he quotes in that book is that every battle is won before it is fought. And
Yeah.
ultimately, I mean, because it begins in the mind,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I think that was, that is pretty significant. We talked earlier about like how some wrestlers are defeated before they ever engage in the art of wrestling or the competition itself. The same is true about some young people in life. The moment that you graduate high school and leave home, you realize how big and scary the world can be, and you may be too afraid to engage before you ever take the step out to actually engage yourself in the world. And we definitely don't want to do that. And I think one thing that you and I have in common right now, work full time. I go to school, I have a kid, and I think you did the same thing or similar when you were getting your career started in the Air Force. And I guess just really quick, again, not trying to put you on the spot, but what I mean, I'm sure there had to be some difficult moments for you in that. Like, how did you persevere and overcome those long nights or even long days?
Yeah, I didn't see it as hard at the time. I look back and I can see some of the things I may have surprised myself in the sense that I was, I joined the military and went to college nights and weekends, and then started raising a family at the same time. So obviously that is a lot uh, to take on for a young person, and also being in the military, you're working full time, and so when you compare it to maybe a more traditional path that people go to college first and then get married and then have a kid and then get, those sequential things, I was almost doing them simultaneously. So looking back, I can see how some of my peers thought that was a lot. But at the time, I just have a very strong work ethic or a high standard for myself. So I just, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and so I also had very high standards. So maybe I took a lot of bites, but um, uh, I got through it, one class at a time, one test at a time. Obviously, go to work every day and try to be a good father and a husband. And it all, over time, it pays off because you eventually graduate and you eventually get promoted and you eventually do other things that all build on your successes.
Right. You know,
It's not exactly a recommended path because it's a very hard path, but it's the
right.
path I took, and I successfully made it through it. And you just that strong work ethic, I guess, is the best way to put it. But
Right. I appreciate one piece of advice that you gave me back almost 2 years ago now, back in December of 2019. I remember going up to you guys and say, "Hey, I want to go back to school and to finish my degree that I started before preaching school." And I remember you telling me like, I think that's fine. Just remember, don't put more on yourself than you can handle. Just be sure that you can carry the
right,
load that you're putting on yourself. And believe it or not, seriously, I mean, I thought about that, and every time a new quarter comes, and I think about it, and I said, okay, can I handle this plus the other responsibilities that I have? And I think that's pretty important, especially to ask yourself before you engage into this particular activity that may be uh, too difficult or may derail you from your ultimate goal and purpose at the time. So I
right,
think there's a guy that he got a blog. His name is Danny Zoo, and he writes really good material, and he wrote some good stuff on wrestling. In fact, he wrestled in high school, and he was a competitive wrestler in college. I don't think that he went pro or did any wrestling in the Olympics or anything like that, but he made this statement in his blog post. He said, "In life, as in wrestling, you can lose everything or you can win everything in a blink of an eye." And he went on to sort of illustrate his point by saying some wrestlers, because they are, many points ahead of their opponents, become overconfident and get pinned just seconds before the match ends, and they lose in the worst way. Then there's the opposite extreme to that, right? You have some wrestlers who find themselves so many points behind that they give up, they lose focus, and because of that, they miss a crucial mistake that was made by their opponent. That if they were focused, they had a chance to win by pinning their opponent, and ultimately, just which would have wiped away the point margin by which they were behind. And so these two extremes, I believe, are prevalent in life. And sometimes, perhaps in school, we find ourselves cruising because we made all A's on the previous report card, and then in the blink of an eye, we end up with failing grades, and you sort of wonder to yourself, like, how did that happen? But then that's the opposite side of that, right? We are so far behind in school that we lose focus, or we're so far behind on the job. Maybe we've been late a couple times, and we just lose focus, right? And we just give up altogether, and we miss that opportunity. Whether in regards to school, there was a flyer on the board that says, "Oh, if you're failing and need extra help, be at this particular place at this particular time." And because I had already given up and lost focus, I totally missed that opportunity. And so This is prevalent among young people, as I'm sure it is among all people. But how can young people avoid the extremes of giving up in the face of adversity and becoming complacent in the face of success?
Well, obviously, no one's exempt from adversity as we go through life. I think we kind of touched on that. And
Right.
so it comes down to that mental toughness, and that toughness is built through the mental callus or your conditioning. And, matches are won and lost, right?
Right.
You're going to lose a few matches in your life and, or on the wrestling match. So those setbacks, whether it be in wrestling or in life, are going to make you stronger.
Right.
Just like breaking a bone, it heals back stronger. The pain you get from working out, that pain, no gain.
Right.
You're gonna have some strength that comes out of that. So you got to think of the lessons that come from those losses. That learn from it. Don't just have a pity party, but to get that mental toughness, you've got to want it. You have to detest mediocrity. You have to really throw yourself back in there. And then obviously, if you realize you started being lazy and that's why you lost, you will detest that. Otherwise, you're not going to really care that you lost. And so hopefully, you know, by detesting that mediocrity and gaining that mental toughness, you get back on the horse and try to overcome that loss. And of course, that takes endurance and patience that
Right.
we can learn from biblically as well. But to have that patient endurance to go the long term, whether it's the long distance of a 6-minute match or your entire 100 years of life.
Right.
You
It
just
remi-
have to constantly detest the mediocrity piece of that.
right. Absolutely. I agree. It reminds me, in fact, of the book of James, when James was reminding those Christians who were scattered abroad because of persecution and things of that nature. Many of them, obviously, if you face some physical harm or danger to your life, you're going to be pretty cautious of that. And some people may even, give up the ultimate cause or at hand to preserve their lives. But James told those Christians to count it or to consider it all joy. And when reading that at first, I thought to myself, like, how can you, how in the world can you
Right,
consider
right.
physical persecution, any persecution for that matter? How in the world can you consider that to be joy? And just going back to your point of patience, when you get down to James 1 in verse 5 through 6, he talks about, consider it joy for this reason: it produces patience. The only way to gain patience is to be tested. And so I think that's the part that people try to avoid, and I'm guilty of that myself. You
Yeah,
try to avoid that because it hurts. I mean, it hurts. And I know you
right.
taught the book of Hebrews, and going over to Hebrews 12 and 13, when those Christians were being disciplined, like, they were suffering persecution as well. I think Jesus had, been gone for some 30 years by that time. And uh, being that they were suffering persecution, many of them began to turn back to Judaism. They didn't want anything to do with Christianity anymore. It's like, hey, I'm done with this. I didn't have to experience this much persecution, or maybe no persecution at all under Judaism. And so why do I need to do this now? This Judaism is obviously better. But God in Hebrews 13, lets those Christians know, like, hey, listen, the person that is chastened or the person that is disciplined is going to be stronger for it. And he lets them know too, like, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And I think that's, at least for me personally, that's been one aspect of my life that I've tried to and continue to try to grow in every day, is patience, having that mental fortitude to overcome adverse situations, and learning to be quiet at times. I think, learning to be quiet is a virtue, and it's easier for some than others, but actually just trying to assess a situation before you react to it or respond to it. So yeah, thank you for your comments on that question. I guess whenever you're talking about, like, taking on responsibility, and I know we alluded to that when I likened the or referred to the to you and I going to school and work and having a family and being young all at the same time. When you think about wrestling again, and obviously I think you said this, that there's a portion of wrestling that is a team sport, like you're wrestling and you're putting up points for the entire team. But then when you're on the mat, it's solo. Like you're by yourself facing this guy. And so if you miss a key takedown or an opportunity, or you missed a chance to take advantage of a particular opportunity in the match, the coach can't help you. Your teammates can't help you. The fans in the crowd can't help you. You're by yourself. You have to take responsibility for that. And similarly in life, mom nor dad cannot, take on your punishment if you choose to get in trouble at school, or if you choose to get in trouble with the law or on the job. I learned this the hard way as well. I never got into any serious trouble, graduating, but there were some difficult and sticky situations that I found myself in right after high school that, my parents couldn't help me with. And so I think one basic question really is, what is responsibility, and why is it important for young people to take responsibility for their actions?
Sure. Yeah. That obviously the word, it's to be responsible, right? The word is, I don't want to define the word with the same word, but it's to be responsible or accountable.
Right.
I like to think of accountability, like the buck stops here, right? So by doing that, you're going to build trust, obviously for your team, that they can count on you, because you're going to train and do what it takes to go out and win your match, or on the job as an adult or as a father or a husband. You're accountable for your actions, or whatever the situation is that you might apply that to. But you're building trust, but you do that because now you have to admit you made some mistakes. It helps
Right.
you learn. If you never take responsibility for your actions, then everything that went wrong wasn't your fault, right? You're just not being accountable. So how are you going to learn from your mistakes? And so now, your character suffers, right? You're not building good character because you can't be accountable. You don't want to be responsible. It's everyone else's fault or whatever, or it's something else's fault or not your fault. So, there's a profound difference between, making a mistake and, a lack of discipline, and at least in the military,
Right.
we making mistakes happen, right? It was unintentional, but if you have a lack of discipline, it's kind of on you. You're not being responsible. You're not being accountable. You're not doing your part for the team or for yourself or for your family or for your job. So ultimately your character suffers, which will affect you in life, right? You're going to be viewed as that narcissist or whatever, that would be someone who can never be wrong, someone who can't admit their mistakes.
Right. I think actually, of course, I'm a Bama fan, so I have to mention Bama in this episode. I'm still trying to convert you, Ron, to Alabama, but it's going to take some time. So
Well, I root for the SEC occasionally.
yeah, but you're on the wrong side. You're on the purple and gold. We're not going to mention their names, but uh,
you got I thought you were honoring them with the painting behind you.
yeah, we can't see anything. I think Nick Saban actually stated this in one of his in one of his summer camps. He mentioned being disciplined, and that was like the primary goal of the team. So essentially, he sort of illustrated this line, or this bar standing above the heads of each player on the team, and it was the responsibility of each player to meet that bar, to meet the standard. The bar wasn't going to be lowered to the players,
Right.
but it was already set for the entire team, and it was the goal of each player to buy into the system and reach that bar as a team, not as an individual, but as a team. And I guess a piece of that is, obviously the goal is to, win a championship as a team, which Alabama happens to do a lot, by the way. But as an individual,
Yes, they do.
but as an individual, your goal is to make sure that you're disciplined. And Nick Saban goes on a lot of rants about being disciplined, but specifically in the game. So like costly penalties that you can avoid. It's like, hey, listen, why do that? If you're losing in the game, now is not the time to lose discipline or to break down mentally. That's the time to be even
Right.
sharper mentally, so you can buy your way back, or work your way back into this thing. And so, yeah, I think discipline has a lot to do with, us taking responsibility for our actions. And so wrestlers, especially in a difficult position, and I guess this could be with any athlete really, but they look for the encouragement and cheers from the coach and their teammates and fans, to motivate them to maneuver out of a submission hold, or if it's a basketball player, to help them, make their free throws, or to help the entire team come back from this, seemingly impossible deficit that they find themselves. This fact, I believe, translates well to life. When if I'm down in life, and I feel pretty bad, and I need someone to talk to. I need a supportive friend to sort of lean on the shoulder of someone else to help me, to give me that encouragement that I need to just keep pushing forward. Just take it one day at a time. And so, why is it so important that young people surround themselves with a strong support system?
Well, we have a phrase I've heard in the military that when you're going to a gunfight, bring all your friends with guns. And
Mm,
so basically what you're saying is in union, there's strength, right? You have
right.
strength with your brothers, your sisters, your close friends, your mentors, your teammates in wrestling. And over time, you're going to build some unbreakable bonds, right? So, which gives your life meaning,
Right.
which, and purpose in life, right? And so and you're more likely because of that to reach your goals that you may have set, and you're going to persevere through those hardships. You can lean on your friends, your teammates, those close connections. Obviously, you're not going to have 150 close friends, but we all have a whatever science has determined is that small number of close friends that are your peers or your trusted mentors, and they give you strength through that bond. And so ultimately it comes down to having, that meaning in life. You
Right.
have to, otherwise, why do you get up out of bed every morning? You have meaning, you have some goals you want, you're passionate about something, all these things we've already talked about, but
Right. It's funny that you mention meaning and finding the meaning in life. I'm actually doing a lot of research right now on fulfillment and how does that look like? How can we obtain fulfillment? And I came across a study in the social science department, and the professionals in that particular department found that, and it's really ironic, they found that people who pursue happiness, which is in our Declaration of Independence, like the pursuit of happiness, uh, they said that those people who pursue happiness actually comes out more miserable than they were before. And I thought about them like,
right.
wow, how is that how is that possible? I thought that, everyone should, pursue happy or want, to be happy and fulfill that desire. But the very fact is happiness is an elusive emotion, right? Your emotions change
Right.
depending on the situation. You're not happy at every moment in your life. It feels good to be happy, of course, but more so to what you just alluded to, finding meaning or having meaning in life is what gets you out of bed in the morning. That
Yeah.
that meaning is what drives you to go to work another day. So,
Yeah.
um,
Like you said, happiness is temporary, and joy is every day
right,
through your relationships with your wife, your friends, your coworkers, because you have a sense of belonging, and you're fighting for a cause, or the cause might be your goals, to raise a child, to do well at work, to save souls, But suffering and hardship are going to come along that way. But that suffering and hardship will give you that sense of meaning. And so, really, that search for meaning not only alleviates suffering, but some say that the absence of meaning can actually cause suffering.
right,
So again, like you said, happiness is temporary, but I think joy is daily. There's
right,
it's like a version of it.
right. I agree. I think even when you look at the life of biblical characters like Paul and Solomon, specifically Paul right now, Paul was content in whatever state that he found himself, but I noticed something about his contentment. His contentment, even, being content, Paul found himself in some pretty difficult situations. And
Right.
it sort of seems that the person who lives for meaning, who pursues meaning rather than happiness, the person, that person is someone who's going to experience more stress, but it's not the stress that would kill you. It's the stress that's going to teach you something, the stress that's going to make you resilient. And I think you alluded to that. It's like,
Right.
don't back down from, stress or adversity. But when you find yourself in it, learn something from it. How can I assist someone
Right.
else who's dealing with this, which is, I mean, sort of the whole point of this podcast, right? Like, share practical
Right.
stories to help people deal and apply, spiritual truths to their lives. And I think yeah, it's pretty significant when you're able to do that, especially from a human standpoint. I mean, we're social beings. We learn from other humans, and when you have someone to share their story in a practical way, it just makes it so much easier, to deal with a certain situation, maybe that they talked about, or to
Right.
implement something that otherwise you would have had no idea to, how to do that. So yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah. Yeah, that application in life is important.
So I know we alluded to wrestling, and we defined it of being a combat sport. You're going to get physical, and so I think that it goes without saying you can't be afraid of the possibility of injury. And have that mental breakdown when the opponent touches you or grapples you and maybe wrestle you to the ground. You can't just check out because of the possibility of an injury. You have to stay focused.
Right.
And
Yeah.
many times injuries, bruises, etc., are inevitable parts of wrestling, and truly, it's inevitable parts of all sports. I remember playing football. Believe me, you're going to come out with some bruises. You're going to come out injured in
Right.
some form or fashion, whether it's your physical muscles or your pride. So, I mean,
Right.
something is going to come out a little and not intact, in other words. And so, why is it important for young people to overcome the fear of failure? And I guess, what are some practical ways that you can give that will help them accomplish this?
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, you can't eliminate fear. It's always the potential is always there. Unfortunately, fear kills more dreams or goals or whatever you want to call it than failure will. That fear actually kills it more than the actual failure. So I would say that since fear can stop you in your tracks, and cause you to miss out on some opportunities, that you probably need to set some goals. You know where you're going. You can't, if you don't know where you're going, anywhere will get you there. So you obviously gotta to have that focus.
Right.
Having that focus on a goal is something you can point your mind to because it starts in the brain. And so you set your mind on that goal anytime you have fear,
Right.
whether it be a wrestler that's before you who has a great reputation and an undefeated record or whatever, or the fact that there's a struggle at your home or your work. You set that goal to give your mind something to think about to overcome that fear, and then you have to think about what's stopping you. You know, to find that strength in the fear. Um, because fear has that power, right? So you got your goal, and then you have to say what is in my way of the goal, whether it be hurdles on a track, you have to jump over it. If it's the guy standing there with the perfect wrestling record, you have to attack it. You have to drive through it. You have to do it based on what you're thinking about, which is your goal to win or to pin them or to get points or whatever. And so once you've taken on, that path to go after the goal, you're committed to it. You have to take that, like I said, fear has power. You have to redirect that power into your goal, right? You need to now take that and make it your strength. Find the strength in the fear,
Mm.
right? Because I can't say you're going to eliminate fear, but because everyone's going to have it eventually, or especially in a maybe your first combat or whatever, when people are shooting at you, you fall back to your goal and you redirect that fear into the muscle memory. What have you repetitively trained to do? Now just go do it the best you can. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But ultimately, all that comes down to is being comfortable in the uncomfortable, right? How do you do that? The fear, it clarifies your path forward. You have to take that fear, redirect it, and plow through it and achieve your goals. That's ultimately what it comes down to.
That's
So,
true. Yeah, I love that example that you just gave, and about finding strength in the fear. And it's like, man, that's remarkable. I immediately thought to myself, like, he just defined courage. To me, that's really what courage is about. It's like, well,
sure,
you can't have courage without the existence of fear. And
right,
I think you alluded to this earlier. It's like you're not going to tell, anyone not to be afraid of combat, because I mean, it's a fearful situation, but it's like, don't, allow that fear to deter you from your ultimate goal, your ultimate purpose. And that's to obviously, conquer the enemy, or in wrestling to win the match and attack your opponent. In life, those things are true as well. It's like when you find yourself in a fearful situation, as you stated, find strength in that fear, have courage. One of my favorite verses, Joshua 1:9, there God telling Joshua after this great leader in Moses has just died. I mean, you can pretty much imagine the shoes that Joshua imagined that he would have to feel, and leading the children of Israel to
right,
the promised land. And God told him, have I not commanded you to be strong and courageous? He's going to be with you. He's going to be with Joshua, and undoubtedly God is going to be with us. And that's a comforting thought. So, Ron, I've appreciated your time that you set aside to be on this episode. I really thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I got a lot of great pointers and a lot of great quotes. I know you said some of them didn't originate with you, but I'll
right.
make sure not to. Yeah, I'll make sure not to put your name beside them. But it will be tied to this episode. I appreciate
Right.
the practical wisdom that you've shared with the audience, and I'm sure that it will add value to their lives. It has to mine already. I have a mental plan to go ahead and implement after this episode for myself, just to be a better person, a better father, a better husband myself. So truly appreciate you. Truly appreciate you serving our country, serving the church as an elder. And are there any other things that you would like to say or refer to before we go?
Not necessarily. Just thanks for having me do this. It's my first podcast. Didn't really know. I'm an older guy, so I'm not really into the technology as much as the younger guys. But hopefully, I was looking at the camera. I tend to look at you on the screen, and maybe I'm not looking at the camera here. But thanks for doing this, and hopefully, people can benefit from the discussion.
I'm sure they will, and don't worry about it. I never look at the camera either. I tend to look at the person on the screen, which is why I choose to do the format via Zoom, because it's more personal. You can see the facial expressions of people and stuff like that, and it just helps. It helps with the conversation. But yeah, I'm gonna do a poll. Whenever whoever watches this video, just tell me how old you think Ron is, and once you submit that to me, I'm going to submit it to him, because he said he always states that he's an older guy, but he doesn't look old at all. So
Well, I don't have hair. That makes me look older for sure. But and obviously in this interview, you asked me how long I was in the military, and I said 30 years. So they have
yeah,
a little bit of an advantage there.
yeah, they do, yeah. But just going based off looks, man, you still look good. I'm pretty sure you're excited to be a grandfather, and we're again thankful for you taking the time. And be sure to tell your wife that I'm thankful as well for, yeah,
Oh,
allowing
thank
me to
you.
steal some of her time away from you, and away from her rather. And
Right.
I'm sure that this episode will indeed, be meaningful to the lives of all of those who listen. So thank you so much, Ron. I appreciate your
Right.
time.
Thank you, Daniel.
And there you have it. So very thankful for Ron for coming onto the show, sharing his story, sharing that wisdom with us, and doing such a fantastic job by utilizing the sport of wrestling to help us understand the various challenges that we face in this life, how to overcome those challenges, to understand that even though we may get knocked down onto the canvas of life, that we can get up and fight another day. And so again, so very thankful for your support. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you are struggling, if you need help trying to understand any facet of your life or the struggles that you're going through, maybe you have tried to reach out for help and received a very abstract or theological answer. One goal of this podcast is to make those things very practical so that we can strive to implement practical Christianity into our lives. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating and review, and also share this with your friends. This is a podcast which is made for young people. What I mean by that is young adults and teenagers. So please share this with your friends, and do let me know of any future topics that you would like to hear discussed on the podcast. Thank you guys so much. And this is Fourth Quarter Christianity.